just getting in here briefly before we start the episode to explain a couple little technical issues that we had here. So, for whatever reason, during the recording, both me and Eric, every now and again, information would just get lost out of nowhere. So we'd be in the middle of a sentence and it would blank out for several seconds here or there. Sometimes we'd lose whole words or half a sentence. And on my end, I was able to re-record those lines or cut them, so you won't really hear anything like that from me. But of course, since Eric isn't here in my editing studio, I unfortunately had to leave a number of them in here. So every now and again, he'll be in the middle of saying something and it'll just awkwardly just cut out and then cut back in, like in the middle of another word or something like that. So I just figured I'd explain what that is up at the front.
It's the same old story. It's been a long day at the job, or maybe it's just starting to feel long, and you feel that urge to stretch your legs and get a little bit of a break. You walk down the street, or maybe you get behind the wheel of your car, and you feel the weight begin to lift. You walk through the doors, and the sound of the place starts to clear the air. You get a table, you order your drink, you listen to the sounds of the bar, and soak in the conversation. Welcome to the T&E Speakeasy with your hosts, Caleb and Eric.
Listen in as your host discussed the 1966 film Persona. Well, here we are yet again talking about another Bergman film. This one, actually, when was The Virgin Spring made? Was that 55? Something like that?
I will tell you in a moment. I want to say it was his movie right after Seventh Seal. The first thing I'm seeing is actually 1960.
Oh, 60. Oh, okay. Yeah, so 6 years later. Yeah, very, very different film. You said you hadn't seen this one beforehand, right?
Certainly not, but always been aware. Well, since I've heard of Bergman, always been aware of it. I didn't know about any of this stuff before I knew who Bergman was, and I didn't know who he was prior to the Criterion box set release.
Yeah, I always knew him from Virgin Spring, but there was a couple other titles that you'd always hear anytime his name came up. That was, of course, The Seventh Seal and then Persona. So this has always been one I've wanted to see.
I had heard of Seventh Seal prior to knowing who Bergman was, but I didn't know anything about it or who made it or why it was famous. But I will admit I was aware of that prior to knowing who Bergman was.
Yeah, and one of the interesting things about Persona is I never, even though it would come up when people would refer to Bergman, for whatever reason in my mind, I always thought this was a Godard film.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would always be like, oh yeah, Persona, that's Bergman. For whatever reason, I keep forgetting. And I never really knew why. And then watching this for the first time, it was kind of making me think of a French New Wave film. So maybe just anytime French New Wave came up, for whatever reason, this kind of got thrown into the conversation.
Yes,
even though it's not French.
Right, but it does get grouped. It does get grouped in with the French New Wave from the sparse reading I've done in preparation for this conversation. It gets grouped in with those movies heavily, along with 8½.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I've never seen that one either. Definitely want to see that soon.
That I have seen, but that's for my taste. That's going a bit far in the world of surrealism. That's going a little bit too deep for me. 8½.
Interesting. That makes me more curious, but also concerned, especially after probably our discussion with this movie. Yeah, and I'll say right off the bat, watching this was a little bit, I'm not going to say a slog, but it was definitely dense. And it took some reflection. And I didn't have that much time for reflection. I didn't get a chance to rewatch this like I did with The Virgin Spring. So my thoughts will probably be a little bit more rough than I had for that podcast, but...
You're 100% correct. I'm on the same page as you. I wanted to start this conversation in my head. I'd already thought about this. And I wanted to start this conversation by saying something like, whatever we could possibly say in the next 2 hours, we are not going to do this movie justice at all. I just want to start with that right up front.
Yeah, I was even thinking, like, God, I hope Eric, like, watched the commentary or some of the extras. I mean, I watched the Paul Schrader one, and I read a couple reviews on IMDb, but...
I got a little bit.
Oh, okay, cool. Now, there were some things, once we got to the actual end of the movie, because I was trying to write notes as it went through, but I just kept being like, I don't even know what notes to write. Like, I'm just so kind of not quite sure what to think here. But there was a couple things at the very end which I felt kind of gave me a little bit of maybe some clues, but I guess we'll see when we get there. But I guess for you, do you have any initial thoughts that you want to say about the movie, or?
This is one of those things where, because I've been told, this is... So, I've been told, just like anyone would if they did any modicum of research before watching this movie, that this is considered one of the greatest films ever. By anybody, Bergman or otherwise. Apparently, this is the second most written about movie in existence. Meaning that people have analyzed this movie to death. Number 1 is Citizen Kane. Number 2 is Persona. Is the most written about film.
Fascinating.
I have learned that people have written not just single books analyzing this movie. People have written book series all dedicated to this one movie and breaking it down. That's why I'm saying we are not going to do it justice today.
Yeah, couple grains of rice is our podcast.
Yeah, we are wholly underqualified. I just noticed the phallus flash across the screen as I have it playing.
You just noticed for the first time?
No, I noticed a little bit earlier, but I didn't notice the very first time I was watching. Let's put it that way.
Oh, okay.
But I did notice afterward.
Yeah, and I'll say that single shot made me immediately go, "Oh, David Fincher, he's seen this."
I think everyone's seen this. I mean, who's a professional filmmaker worth their salt? I think they've all seen this. To be fair, because I know the reputation, I went into the movie thinking I know I'm underqualified. I'm not going to get it. This is what happens to me, or what happened to me when I watched many of the Kubrick films for the first time. My first time is there's some of them that I didn't quite grasp the first time, and I'm like, that's okay, and I did grasp some of this movie, but some of that was because I had read small things that helped me, that I had just happened to see, not because I was doing research, but just because I was reading about something else and it mentioned something about Persona. So those things aided me along the way. And even though I don't fully understand it all on my own, I had assistance. It's just, this movie is part of why Bergman is on a whole other level than most filmmakers. This movie is, I guess, a prime example of that. And Seven Seals that way too, in a different way. But it's unfortunate that, like, our friend Sean just watched Seven Seal one time, and Sean, if it's too difficult, then that's too much. That's too much trouble. But for me, when I watch something like that, I consider it a challenge when I watch a movie that I don't fully get. If it's done by someone of some prominence, or not just, I'm not watching like Goblin 2 trying to like unravel the mysteries of Goblin 2. I'm just saying, like, but if it's something like this, I'm gonna have to rewatch it. And yes, we would have benefited if we had more time, or if I had more time to marinate on it, watch it again, do more research on my own. This movie is something else. It's something else. But now I will say, I think I mentioned to you, there was a reason why it was on the tip of my mind when you had asked me about what maybe we should watch next, and I think you're gonna want to ask that question now.
Yeah, what's on the tip of your mind? I'm very curious of this one.
Or this is why it was on the tip of my mind at the time.
Wait, just beforehand, is it because of Enemy?
Yes. Yes, it is.
Sorry to cut you off there.
You got it. It is because. Do you know why?
One, is it because we see a tarantula, and two, is it because we have the essence of the double? That's really the one.
It's more the second thing you said more than the first. The tarantula was an added bonus.
Yeah, those are just more of a joke, but
for those following Kayla's podcast, but I also don't know how in what order these things release either. But in real time,
that's fair.
In real time chronology, the last thing we watched as a group or together was Enemy and discussed was Enemy. And while I was prepping for that discussion and I was reading things about Enemy, somebody mentioned how, this is probably partially Enemy was partially Villeneuve's like callback to Persona or something. Or it was saying that Villeneuve was obviously inspired by Persona for Enemy. So I had read that when we were working on Enemy. So then when you asked, like, maybe which Bergman, that's why this one popped to the front of my mind, was because I read that there was some connection between this and Enemy. And then when I saw the spider, I thought, I bet that's not random. I bet that's something. And from what I understand, I don't know what psychologist or who came up with this theory, but apparently when you dream of a spider, that's supposed to mean that you're either manipulating someone or someone is manipulating you. And that works perfect for Enemy. So I feel like there's something to that.
That's interesting. I mean, I've never put much stock in the interpretations of dreams, but okay, yeah, that's interesting. It's definitely interesting.
Well, to me, like, interpretation of dreams doesn't matter. What matters is if we establish this is what it means, and then artists use that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's, to me, what matters more.
It's just another little dig for me to pop psychology, which I do digs to quite often.
That being said, I think there is a lot to be garnered from analyzing dreams or your own dreams, and even though that's not a science in any way, I do think there is some validity to that endeavor. I think you can extract truths about yourself or your life or something through the non-science of analyzing your dreams. I think there's something to that.
Yeah. My digs are semi-facetious, but I do like to get them in when I can.
Yeah.
But just for my little bit, so for Persona here, I'd had this on one of my surrealist lists for many years, and it was never one that I reached for, just because I would look at the cover, I'd read the brief like little synopsis, which I don't even remember what it was, but whatever it was, I was never particularly interested.
Mm-hmm.
And I would see images of it, and I'd be like, it looks like it's like, I love the pretty black and white, but it doesn't look very visually exciting as a surrealist piece, which is one of the reasons I come to surrealism. So it probably would have taken me years to get to it, just in terms of me working my way through that list. So I'm glad it came up here. But yeah, definitely a little more on the dense side than I usually am used to. And like I said, how it feels like French New Wave. French New Wave has never been a particular genre or movement, I should say, that I've really delved into much. I really only have one filmmaker that I've explored his filmography that works in that regard, and I could definitely see some of the kind of fingerprints between the two, kind of walking the same track. But
which one are you talking about, or what are you talking about?
Alain Robbe-Grillet.
Oh, I have not heard of that. No. What movie was he known for?
He's made a bunch of them, but I think one of his more famous ones is like the Immortal one, or what's it called? He's got a bunch of weird titles. Let me grab his case. It's sitting right next to me. A lot of his titles are strange. So yeah, the one I was thinking of was Successive Slidings of Pleasure, or And Took the Dice, or Trans-Europe Express. Yeah, I've seen at least the films of his that I've owned, and all of them are, yes, dense and weird, and in my opinion, not super decipherable. But again, I've only seen them all like once or twice a piece, so.
I've just only seen Breathless by Godard. I saw it about a year ago or so, and I thought it was
Mm.
brilliant. It's not dense, as you say. I mean, it's pretty straightforward if you watch it. Well, okay, there's layers to it if you really want to think about it, but I mean, on its surface, it's pretty straightforward as a movie and a narrative. Um, I just thought it was brilliant, and so I don't have much to base my understanding on French New Wave since I've only really seen one movie in full. And the way I interpreted it was that I keep referring to those BBS movies of the late 60s and early 70s. It seems like that BBS movement in the United States was like the American equivalent of what the French New Wave was in its time. It was like a delayed French. It was like a delayed American New Wave um, that happened. That was kind of like maybe directly, indirectly inspired by the French New Wave. And because when you watch, if you've seen it, or if anyone listening has seen it, that's a movie from I don't know 59 or something or 58, but it feels so much more modern than its release year. So much more modern, and that's what's like to me really striking about that movie. Um, and it was just nice, and it was like a similar tale of not exactly, but a little bit like a Bonnie and Clyde type story. Um, and it's funny because Bonnie and Clyde was the movie that sort of unofficially kicked off the new wave for American cinema in '68. That's sort of
Hmm.
considered the first one that started that revolution. And it's funny because we were off air just talking about Natural Born Killers, and that played a similar role in the '90s in a way, not exactly because some of the movies of that '90s movement predated Natural Born Killers, but it's still it's funny because it's another Bonnie and Clyde type story, and it's trying to push boundaries.
Yeah. Oh, but I was gonna say it's also funny because we were talking earlier about the recent movies I've been watching on this big Criterion list that I made.
Mm-hmm.
I actually even made a little French New Wave section, so it's a little bit too bad that I didn't watch those three films: the 400 Blows, Hiroshima, Mon Amour, and Breathless. All three of those are in a little row for me to watch for a little
Yeah,
French New Wave.
400 Blows is what I wanted to watch immediately after Breathless. It's just for some reason I watched the first 10 minutes and I was like, I'm good. Let me go
Mm.
watch Stranger Things again, or what do you call it, Cobra Kai? Because I had to like just change my mindset or something for a second. But I'll get back to it though. 400 Blows. I will get back.
Yeah, and I'm actually more inspired after watching this to go and watch that little retrospective that I built.
Hell yeah.
But I was going to say about Alain Robbe-Gurlet, the thing that all his movies that I've seen kind of have the connection to this movie is he's always playing with the fact that there's a level of artifice in the fact that you're watching a film. His movies are never watch this, sit and kind of be immersed in the story. He's constantly breaking in and being like, don't forget you're watching a film. Don't forget there's a filmmaker behind it that's telling you this story.
Yes. I mean, I have no idea what you're talking about. I'm talking about the source material, but the concept, that's perfect.
That's why I kept thinking of French New Wave when I was watching this, because I kept thinking of that director. Now, I wouldn't call Robbe-Gurlet a great filmmaker. I think he's a lot more sloppy than this movie is. But definitely, I feel like that was some of the preparation that I had for this kind of very much whatever this is type of story.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, no, but what you just said about the movie never letting you forget that a filmmaker made this. That's a big theme in this movie. It's a big theme.
Hmm.
It's 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 one of many themes of this. Man, how do you even unpack this movie?
I have no clue.
No, because I know inklings of of what makes it, like what its DNA is made up of, but yet I still don't know how to tackle it because there's so much intertwined. Okay, let me just try piece by piece. Like, how do you eat a Buick? You just like eat it like one spoonful at a time. Um,
Yeah, I was gonna say maybe we should start with just the extended opening here,
okay,
which it very much kind of sets you in a mood.
okay, and what do you think that mood is?
Yeah, I was gonna ask, have you ever seen the film? And I don't even know how to pronounce this. Um, it's the one by Louis Buñuel and Salvador Dali, Un Chien Andalou, something like that, something in that kind of vein. A very famous surrealist short film. I think the prevailing image that most people would know is like a shaving razor going across someone's eyeball.
I believe I had seen clips of it, like in some special features for something that I was watching. But yeah, but I don't know much about it. But I've seen clips, like in some documentary or supplemental footage for something else.
Yeah, very powerful little short film. And this opening of this movie reminded me of it quite a bit, except for the fact that we focus a lot on, again, the artifice of the fact that this is a film.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we start out seeing, like, all the little clips of the film reels there, and I feel like the intent is solely to just distance the audience from the movie, in a way.
That's part of the
But,
intent, I believe, but not sole intent.
yes, that's fair. Because I was going to say, yeah, there's bits of it where I don't necessarily feel what the intent is. Like when we see the little kid's hands kind of like fiddling around or something.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I'm not quite sure what that is. And of course we get the penis, which I thought was maybe a symbol for this is from a male gaze, but I'm really not sure because there's not a huge sexual element to the movie, which I was more expecting.
Well, there is and there isn't, depending on what level you want to analyze this movie on. There is and there isn't a huge sexual element, actually.
Hmm. Interesting.
I mean, come on, dude. There's a whole scene where there's like, um, you're not of the right generation, but I can't remember what the section in Penthouse magazine was called. The letters to Penthouse section, where people would just pen like their own little fan fiction, like intense little sex stories, and that was like a really important section of the Penthouse magazine back in the day, back when it in its prime, and
Sounds like the Red Shoe Diaries, that old HBO show. Maybe it wasn't HBO.
yeah, it was like the male version of that, and that was a really big thing in Penthouse magazine. And there's this whole scene in this movie that is essentially that, and you can't just skip over that.
Yeah,
Um,
that's certainly an important moment, but I don't feel like there's a pervasive sexual element to it as you might expect from that penis being there and stuff.
no, never, or not never, but not in the traditional way, but in like the subliminal abstract way. I think there's a lot of arguments to be made for that, but not in a straightforward way in the movie.
And I was thinking about 1966 sneaking subliminal messages in there like that little image. Like there's no expectation that people would be able to slow this down and watch it on like a VHS tape.
You're 100% right.
So really that is meant to be completely subliminal. So that's why I was wondering what the intent is. Is it intent to...
I think it's partially a joke, but I think it's probably not that simple either.
Yeah, I was thinking because it's such a female-focused story, there's almost no male characters that we see except
Oh,
for
hold
like one.
on to that thought. Because something you get from when you watch like a bunch of Bergman movies, even though a lot of his movies center or focus on female characters, probably maybe more so than male characters, but there's definitely ones that focus on male perspectives as well. But regardless, you see, Bergman operates like the way Woody Allen does, even though they do their own thing, but they operate the same way, which is both of those writers, both of those guys are constantly up in their heads, trying to sort out their own personal thoughts and feelings about a multitude of things, like things about life, things about politics, things about history, whatever. These men are always deeply in thought, and when they write a screenplay, what they tend to do is they tend to hash out something, an idea, a thought, a feeling, through their screenplay, through the characters in their screenplay, to the point that even if there's a man and a woman and a doctor and a priest character, let's just say, they all represent parts of the author's brain. So all the characters represent the writer's voice. So even if the movie just centers on one main heroine or two females, these women, these fictional women characters are still a filter for this man's ponderings, aka Ingmar Bergman. So even though these are females talking about more feminine topics and ideas, it's still, at the end of the day, Bergman's ideas and interpretations of a female's perspective. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it doesn't. It actually, I think, fulfills my interpretation of the penis even more. Because this whole introduction here is kind of displaying the artifice of the film. And to give the shot of the penis there as we're kind of counting down the reels is kind of a way of signaling, hey, even though this is going to be a female film, as you watch it, there's still very much a male perspective behind the force of the film.
You're absolutely right. I think we did it. I think we got that 1/3 of a second of film. No, I think we got it, or we got part of it. I really think that's hitting the mark to some degree.
Yeah, and we were talking earlier. You were saying how the spider kind of symbolizes manipulation. I was still thinking, kind of stuck in Enemy, thinking that the spider some way was a kind of trap of sexuality.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe the spider here is, maybe more of a sign of just, again, showing that this is a vision from a director and that everything you're seeing is just a manipulation.
Yes.
None of it's real. So
yes,
that's interesting.
No, you're absolutely right. Well, the reason I think you're right is not because I'm anointing you right. It's because this has been reflected in the things that I tried to read before our discussion. And yeah, no, I think you're totally going down the right road, the right track, in your line of reasoning.
Yeah, now here's where the confusion kicks in, because we get the shot of the lamb being what I thought initially was sacrificed, and then we see the kind of religious imagery of a nail being driven into a hand.
Mm-hmm.
And I assumed this movie was going to be, again, in the line of the Virgin Spring, and spend a lot of time talking about religion.
Mm-hmm.
But we get almost none of it after this, so I'm a little lost already. Any ideas?
I have a lot of ideas based on other things I've read adjacent to psychology and things like that, and history and myths. So you get the lamb, and then right soon after, just as you said, you see like the nail going into the hand, which is obviously signaling like the crucifixion or the and all that, and Christ and everything. That's heavily implied. So when you put those things side by side, you think about the Lamb of God, as they say in Catholicism. And what was the role of animals in animal sacrifice? Do you know? I mean, like in Judeo-Christian like history. So something that is known about like human sociology and archaeology, a common theme throughout the world with like historical cultures, no matter what continent you're on, there's a common human thing about sacrifices and like sacrificing to the gods, and it's something that runs like in all cultures, like in in South America, Central America, Mesopotamia. Like it's just this weird universal thing that humans have, like subconsciously. Um, and what's the deal with you know how it works? Like we need to appease the gods. You know, we need to have a sacrifice, drop the virgin into the volcano, and maybe the gods will, you know, answer our prayers or whatever. Um,
Yeah. Innocent blood.
and so in ancient or in old school, like Judaism and whatnot, it was a thing for them too. Like it was a concept that they also believed in from their earliest days. But what happened is they got as they modernized their religion over time is that they were like, and that's what the whole Christ thing is, obviously, like that's the culmination of that idea of that we all have these sins, and if you have one person who can, like, we can give up or sacrifice, then somehow that'll take all our sins away, symbolically. And it's weird too because there's the concept of the scapegoat, and that's the same concept. And it's funny because it's a goat, right? And what ancient Hebrews figured out was, you know what? We don't necessarily have to kill a virgin and drop her in a volcano. What we can do is just use an animal as like a substitute for a human. So that's why when you look in the Old Testament and stuff, there's all this stuff about how often you're supposed to sacrifice like an animal or an ox or whatever, because they were like, yeah, it's more symbolic than actually killing a human and sacrificing them.
Yeah, they even talk about like crops and stuff too.
Right. So then when you get into like modern psychology, what some psychologists postulate is there's a reasoning to why humans have this subconscious connection with sacrifice, which is to achieve anything in life, to accomplish something like your career or whatever you're trying to accomplish, become an amazing musician or whatever. The price of that is always a sacrifice of some kind, a personal sacrifice. Whether it's staying in the dorm in college and never going, sacrificing like your free time to just focus on your studies, or whether sacrifice whatever that means. There's always, every achievement involves a sacrifice, and that's just the way the world works. And so some psychologists postulate that in order for you to have any type of change or growth, you have to symbolically sacrifice something yourself. And so I know this is a long road to get to, but back to the movie. This person, or is it people, or is it person? This person is having like a little bit of an existential crisis in the movie, whoever you think the protagonist is, and they're trying to get through it. And so seeing like a lamb image or a Christ image lends me to believe that if you're going to fix your situation or your problem, it's going to take some sort of sacrifice, even if that's metaphorical. And I may be stretching, but I think there's something to that in order for this character to resolve their situation, they're going to have to work through some things, and it's not going to be something you want to do, but it's the only way you're going to get through this bad patch. I don't know, does any of this make sense? Or did I go too long around?
No, it totally makes sense. The connective tissue of how the movie itself gets there is where it gets a little confused, because absolutely, like you said, is it two people or one? I mean, I think, one person, and one of the elements, one of the sides of that person kind of has to be the one to get sacrificed.
Yes, or you have to give up something. You have to give up something, like, even if it has to do with like beliefs, because you're so sure about this, or you're so sure about what's depressing you right now. You're so sure about and And for whoever you are and whatever problem you have, like in real life, people can't let go of their grief. It's almost like it's a part of them, and to get rid of it, you're gonna have to sacrifice something. And what I mean is, you're gonna have to sacrifice that part where you bitterly hate your dad. I'm just saying, because that's a common one. And you may be so justified in your hatred or bitterness because of actual things that happened in the past or whatever, but you have to let certain things go. You just have to let it go. And I'm oversimplifying it, obviously, but these the two characters that are going back and forth with each other in a way, even though it's the same person. Again, it's a person warring with themselves in the movie.
Yes.
And in order to make any headway to recovery, somebody, or maybe both, have to give up some of what they can't give up about their stance or beliefs. Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay, good.
But I just to interrupt you again. So I've still been watching the this intro very slowly. I've just been pausing and then pressing play again. And we get all these scenes of like dead people, and then we see this kid. Now, do you think in some way that this kid is meant to be the kid that comes up numerous times throughout the movie for our lead character, or what do you think this is supposed to be? Because
I did not figure that out or have that idea on my own, but from my readings, that's what people believe.
Oh, okay.
And people believe there's also a resemblance, even though it's a blurred picture. People believe that it resembles that kid at the beginning. Yes.
That's why I asked. Yes, because I thought that. I mean, we didn't get a good look at it, but I was like, maybe it looks like that kid, and
yes.
And I guess because this opening isn't really in the world of the film, it's outside of the film. What's the kid supposed to represent looking at the screen of his mother and like trying to looking at us? Or are we the mother?
Again, these are not my ideas, but and I haven't read it enough to get this all down packed, but okay. So from my understanding, because I didn't want to say this yet because I wanted to hear more what you were going to come up with, and that was interesting. But so the way people interpret the beginning of the movie, the opening 6 minutes or whatever it is, they think it plays two roles. On the one hand, they think if you break it down, it's a 6-minute version of the entire movie. That's one part of it.
Oh.
It pretty much covers like the whole course of the movie in 6 minutes. But the other interpretation of it, well, simultaneously, is that this movie is both about a person struggling with their internal struggles, and it's simultaneously about movie making in general. And you've already said a bunch of those ideas already, meaning that the magic of movies is that while you're watching that particular movie, if the director, producer, etc. have done their job correctly, they will make you connect to this story, these characters, and you will follow along on the ride of the story, even though it's all fake. It's all made up. Like, your brain is being tricked like you're in the Matrix. Like, none of this really happens. None of them, and I'm talking about all movies in general, not just Persona. None of this really happens. None of this is real. Your brain is literally getting tricked by frames per second. These aren't even moving pictures. Mm-hmm. They're still pictures, but they're moving so fast. It's manufactured reality to you. And we've talked about some movies like this before, or some of them I've discussed with you, some of them I've discussed with other people. But you know how there's those movies that are considered... we talked about one in the last 2 or 3 months. A movie that is a movie, but it's also a movie about filmmaking at the same time.
The Prestige, I think we talked about.
Yeah. Yes, you're right. And another one, also from Nolan, of course, that I always think about is Inception.
Hmm.
Have you heard that postulated before? I mean, maybe not by me, but by someone else. Or are you familiar with that?
Oh, I remember the old sci-fi party line days. Yeah, talking about that film over and over.
Right, but I'm not the only person who has that idea. But like when Leo DiCaprio is describing how you make a dream, how you have to like design the world and you have to make it like believable enough, but you got to do certain things to trick the audience, not the audience, but whoever's going to be in the dream. You know, if all the people move at the same time, that'll give it away. You know, because that'll seem like manufactured or fake. So just like little tricks, and in all the promotional stuff for that movie, like each character was given like a name, like the architect and the whatever and the whatever and the whatever, and all those names were like pseudonyms for like producer, cinematographer, writer, you know. And it's like every one of those characters played a role in making the movie or the dream, so to speak. So Inception, amongst many other things like dreams, it's also again it's a critique or an essay on movie making or movie magic because again the director and producer everyone else in the crew and cast they designed something completely fake, but for that time that you're watching it your brain just goes along like, yes, I'm in this story. These are real characters with real stakes, and I want to know how they get through it. Anyway, and yeah, you're right. The Prestige, that was the one that came up, and there's others, of course, out there. And apparently, people consider this the same thing. They consider this Bergman trying to work out some of his own personal issues, along with making a movie about making movies. He's doing both at the same time, supposedly. And going back to the kid at the beginning, it has something to do. Um, so I read this somewhere that people consider like going to the movies as like watching real life through a window pane. Like the screen represents, a window pane, and it's like you're seeing what you can see through the window, and that's what the director is giving you, right, to tell their story. And supposedly, the boy at the beginning and the way it's all set up, Bergman's doing he's doing a play, like how you do a play on words. He's doing a play on concept of that concept. He's like reversing it or something. He's making, instead of you being on the outside looking through the window pane, he's making it like the kid is on the inside of. He's doing something. He's inverting it somehow.
Well, yeah. Let me see if I can get my version of what I
Okay.
thought it was from what you were saying. So this movie plays numerous times over the whole thing about how, kind of the people themselves are mirrors. The movie's a mirror in a way.
Yes.
I thought maybe the kid on screen is supposed to be kind of the mirrored version of the people who can believe the fiction of a film.
Okay.
And the way the kid kind of reaches for his mother, reaches for kind of this kind of primal aspect of themselves, is supposed to be kind of us reaching out and giving ourselves to the film. That's just the bullshit that I thought of, and that's why I was asking if the kid was supposed to connect. I don't know if that's really what he meant, but
I think it works. I think it works with everything else. I think it works with everything else because it has something to do. Again, I'm spitballing off some stuff I read. Um, it's something to do with the kid also, because again, it's multi-level. It's not just one thing, but it's also the kid trying to reconnect to his mother, but not having a true representation. So another you could poetically interpret it is like if you lost your parent or you're separated from your parent at a young age, but you get older and you still have a natural longing for reconnecting to your parent. And if you can imagine, like, if they're not there, maybe you have trouble like remembering exactly what their face looks like. You know what I mean? Maybe it's out of focus, and you're seeing it again through a prism of your mind, and we're just seeing a version of that as it being projected and being on like the inside of the screen or whatever. But symbolically, I think it's like trying to imagine someone or something that you're trying to connect with, but just having like a facsimile that's the best thing, the next best thing you can come up with. I think it's some play on that as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, I wish I was more educated on film this time, but I could almost even see it as someone being like, this is the person in you who wishes for escapism, but films have lost their way, and you're trying to reconnect. Maybe I'm just, I don't know, maybe I'm going off. I'm a little tipsy now, so.
So, and then another part of the movie, let's just dial it down on the artsy fartsyism for a second.
Sure.
I only got to see a little bit of the special features, but as always, like with most Bergman or all Bergman movies, he's heavily influenced by what's going on in his life at the moment. And he had just been ill. He was working on a movie like the year prior to this, or before he wrote this. He was working on a movie and he had picked up like a really bad lung infection. And it had him in the hospital for a while. And so a lot of the concepts and some of the images were inspired by his long hospital stay and like the depression of not being able to not living his regular life, being stuck in the hospital. Supposedly the images of some of the dead bodies were based upon some of the things he saw while he was in the hospital. And then he was just dealing with a bunch of grief and depression and anxiety, like he always is, like so many great other artists. And so again, that's what he does. He writes from personal life a lot. It's all his movies are semi-autobiographical to different degrees. And again, if you watch many Bergman movies, he's always talking about couples going through different stages of a relationship, meaning like the initial meeting, the passionate phase, and then where the newness wears away, and then the people separate, whether it's amicable or not. He's constantly talking about what do you call it, or what do you want to call it? I was gonna say the opposite of monogamy, but not polygamy, but
polyamory,
something like that, something like polyamory. He's constantly referencing that in so many of his movies, again because it's semi-autobiographical. If you know anything about him, he is famous for being a coxman. He's famous for that, and even though he has like the loves of his life, it's like specific ones, he can still never settle down ever, and he's known to have had like deep, loving relationships that were also the open type as well. Where there was an understanding that we still see other people, but we still have our bond as well. So if you read anything about his life, that's such a big part of him. And it's constantly reflected in many characters in many of his movies, over and over.
Oh, interesting.
That's what I'm saying. There's certain directors, like Nolan. If you watch all his movies, there's always an aspect of daddy issues, always, in every Nolan movie. And so, there's got to be something semi-autobiographical about that. He has daddy issues. We get it. He's constantly referencing that. And so, Bergman is constantly referencing not being able to settle down with one woman, constantly referencing the newness of a new relationship, constantly referencing not wanting to have children, like abortion and stuff like that comes up over and over and over again.
Well, it's perfect you're saying all this, because I've been trying to hold on to this thought so I don't forget. I was trying to finish a thought there, but I just couldn't find the track of it until I finish watching this one scene. So I was saying how the kid, maybe he's like someone who's like trying to attach himself again to being that person who could fall into the fiction of telling a story. And then after that, we cut to the scene of the actress trying to play Electra. But for whatever reason, the lines won't come to her. She freezes up, and all she can do is just want to laugh, but won't be able to. It's almost like she can't take this story seriously, or can't take like the art of telling stories seriously.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know if he was having some issues with his career at the time, or?
Yes, you're right. See, you're good, man. You're good because you're going into this stuff blind, and then like you're told. Yes, you're right. And I learned this again in the little bit of the special features I got to get into, because not long prior to this movie, Bergman had just done his first color movie, which was like a big deal because he was already Bergman, obviously, at this time. And it was like, ooh, Bergman's going to do his first color film. And it was like a big deal. And he was hoping it was going to be like a big, and it was like actually a big flop. It was a failure. It was like widely panned and just like, and that was one issue that happened to him because he was like, oh my gosh, because he had a reputation already, and he obviously, like any creator, wants to deliver like their next best thing. So that was like a bitter pill to swallow, that his first color movie was not well received. But also,
which movie was it?
I don't know. I have to look it up because I don't think it's in the Criterion set, but I'm not 100% sure.
Oh, okay.
But and then also in 1963, I think, he was made like the president of like the Swedish whatever film institute or whatever. I don't know what it is, but something like that. And and for 3 years he held that position, and apparently it was like a huge job, like dealing with all that, and it like took over like his life at the time. But he did not enjoy it. It was like having a job, an extra job besides making movies, and apparently that had worn him out as well. So it's a combination of him having all those extra responsibilities combined with his movie that didn't do well, and so he was just kind of like, oh fuck. And then this was the movie that he made like after that, along with what I mentioned about him being sick and stuff. So he was like going back to black and white, back to his comfort zone, and then dealing with those issues of like, I failed and I couldn't do it. Like, why couldn't I do it? Because I'm me, and all that stuff.
Yeah, and so we get a sick, mute protagonist and a nurse trying to nurse her back to health.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting.
But again, if you follow the history of his works, that is how he works. Like, he's constantly pulling from like his current life situation or whatever. And again, he always has male characters hooking up with female characters, and there's usually like a 20-year difference or something like that. Again, mirroring his own life constantly.
Oh, it's interesting you say that, because I remember you mentioned that on our previous Bergman episode. But I assumed that you meant that the men were 20 years difference, but in this case it's, I don't know about 20 years, but they definitely describe the orgy being with young boys.
You're right in that.
I almost got the impression that they were talking about potentially early puberty or potentially prepubescent boys. The way she described it sounded like they were like weirdly young, so I was a little like, what's this all about?
Possible, and he might have, when someone like him, who's dense, I mean dense when you get into like their personal psychology, who knows? Because he could. That's the thing about, I think, a lot of artists like Bergman is like, they have some weird thoughts in their head, and then they'll reference it very blatantly in their artistic works. And even though it can be so blatant, like some people just like pass right over it. You know what I mean? And in that situation, I don't know, but perhaps he just did a gender swap, and in that situation he's the guy, and maybe he's had some, I'm spitballing here. I'm not saying this is true, but that maybe he's had like a fancy or some weird situations with some potentially underage girls, and this is his way of saying that in one of his films while partially masking it at the same time by flipping the genders, and you know what I'm saying? And I'm not saying it's an actual thing, but that is what Bergman does though with other concepts and truths about himself. But the reason I was yes, and it almost always is the much older man, and don't tell me it wasn't striking a little bit when the nurses wait no, it was not the nurse, it was the
The
actress's
actress.
husband supposedly appears. People debate if he
Yes.
ever actually appeared or not, but didn't it strike you like the obvious age difference?
Yeah, he looked like he was like maybe like in his late 50s or mid 50s, and he was like blind.
Yes. And Bergman does that all the time. No, not necessarily blind, but the blind is symbolic for not even recognizing his lover.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was wondering why they made him blind. I'm like, what is this? What is this here for?
It's that, oh, you can sleep with this other woman and you don't even realize it's not me. Like, you can't tell the difference.
You know, that was a super curious scene. Like throughout the whole movie, I kept getting the inkling. I was like, is this doing a piece where they're one and the same? But it really wasn't clear for a good amount of the movie. But by the time we got to that bit, I thought that's when they were really making it clear, because yeah, she was like admitting basically that she was that character. But
Yes.
something about the framing of it was just leaving me mixed as to what I'm supposed to be getting from it. Like, because I was never clear which one we're supposed to see as the surface character and which one's supposed to be like the mask character that she plays to the world. Like, is the nurse supposed to be both, or is she the one that's hidden? I kept getting tripping up over that.
I think first of all, I have to ask, why did you specifically say it that way? Who's the mask character?
Well, one, I think it was either in the Paul Schrader or maybe one of those IMDb things. They mentioned that the movie means mask in some language. I can't remember what language, but also the actress characters like so kind of flat, and her expressions are so blank. Go ahead.
Persona is a Latin word that means mask. That's why I thought it was curious that you use that specific word. Because again, I was like, did you just pull that shit out of your ass again? No, but I think you're so on the money, and I think you're so on the money, and I think it's similar to the conversation in Kill Bill Volume 2, where the original question you posed, which is, who is the real person? Is Superman the real person, or is Clark Kent the real person, or is the truth that he's really both people?
That's interesting. Well, I feel like the artifice of this movie kind of says that one of them's not really the real person. But
I was gonna say, based on what you were just saying, before I wanted to know about the mask part. I think, okay, first of all, I think this is totally one person. There is no two separate people, and you can interpret it that way if you want. And some other writer said that it totally works if you want to do it as two separate people. But it's a different movie though, if you look at it that way, which is fine. But no, I think the intention is this is one person. And I think the question you bring up is very germane, because I think it's very possible that the writer, because he's talking about himself, I think the writer is not sure who is the real person and who is the mask. That's the way I take it.
That's interesting.
Because, again, if I think about my own personal life, I have similar existential issues when I think about that about myself. Because I have a little bit of a multi-personality thing that I give off. But but I can narrow it down to two specifically, even though I do shades of other personalities as well. But you could narrow me down to two different halves if you wanted to. Like if I had a secret camera crew that followed me 24/7, and you went back and looked at the footage, you would see there's two noticeably very different people that I am at the same time, in different places and situations. And I've often thought about it myself. I always thought that the more private version of me is the real me, and the person I am in public is the mask. I've thought that since I was pretty young. But the older I get, the more I'm starting to reevaluate it, and I'm like, is that really true? Like, because I always used to tell people when I was younger, close friends, like that the person who was me more in public was more like the fake me. But like I said, the older I get, the more I think, why is that the fake me? I mean, why is the more personal one the real me? Like, aren't they both me? Like, and I think again, I think maybe maybe I'm painting myself too much onto Bergman, but I don't think I am. I think he probably had the same thoughts himself. Yeah.
And just to go back to the title quickly, you said it was an Italian word or
Latin.
Latin. Yeah, and I kept wondering when I was watching it, why is a movie called Persona? And yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, that works.
Damn it! And I forgot what the original title was. Oh, the original title. I remember now. So the original title for his screenplay was cinematography, and somebody he works with was like, "Hell no, you are not going to call this movie cinematography. No, you are not." So he tried a bunch of different titles. Another one was like Opus 28, or another one was like Film Movie or something. And eventually, yeah, he settled on Persona.
That's what it's all about. The facade of that's fitting. If he was originally going to call it just cinematography, that's kind of a weird title, but I guess it means a similar thing. It's basically just a mask. But that's interesting.
It's crazy. All this stuff is crazy. But that's the thing. See, if you're not a movie buff, you're like a casual, and I hate to make it sound like a pejorative every time I say that in a discussion. But I'm just saying, we understand people just want to just get in and out, so to speak. They're not trying to like, rack their brain over something. And so, because I mean, maybe you're that kind of person who rather prefer a straightforward movie, and you just think, man, these guys are bullshitting right now. Meaning myself and Caleb, like we're just bullshitting. Like somebody told us this guy's famous, and so we're justifying it by overanalyzing his movie. But in the kindest way, I say F you if that's what you really think. Because the great filmmakers or the great artists, whether they're poets or painters or whatever, sculptors, they think this shit out in advance. They work it out. It's not fucking accidental, and we're just like pulling shit out of our ass to justify it. That's not the way it works.
Just for anyone who is thinking from that point of view, because this is what I kept thinking when I was watching this. Did you enjoy this movie? Just the experience of sitting down and watching it from beginning to end.
Again, I have to qualify my answer to that question, which is, this is again the approach I took when I was going through the Kubrick catalog for my first time, which is there were certain ones that I watched and I thought, okay, that was interesting, but I know I'm not getting it. I'm not getting the full picture. And to me personally, part of my joy of loving movies is pulling it apart and working for it. It's the whole concept about like pistachio nuts and sunflower seeds. There's something about having to break the shell yourself before you get the little prize inside, versus when you buy the jars that just come with the seeds by themselves. Like, they're good when you buy them like pre-shelled, but it's for some weird reason not as satisfying. And that's how I feel about movies, and especially the great movies. It is fun for me to like, I gotta crack this egg. I gotta crack this egg. And I remember like Eyes Wide Shut was a movie like that for me, where I kept hitting my head against the wall over and over. Like, and some people say, yeah, that's just because you're just trying to justify that it's a good movie. Like you're bending over backwards to justify it. But I don't believe that. I mean, if it's coming from Kubrick, I don't believe that. Like, I'm like, no, there is more fucking here. There is more fucking here. And it took me a lot of rewatching and a lot of reading articles. And I believe, yes, there is, in fact, a hell of a lot going there. But you have to work for it. Unless you're just some kind of fucking genius. And it just made sense to you the first time. But you have to work for it. And 2001, when I saw it 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 25 years ago, I thought I understood it enough at that time. My God, do I understand so much more about that movie just from what I've learned in the last 3 years. Like, so much more that I had no concept of 10, 15, 20 years ago. So, yeah. So no, did I. No, upon first viewing, was I like fucking blown away by this? No. But I it's a humble brag, but I just go, no, it's because I'm not good enough. But I know if I keep working at it, I'll figure it out. And that's, to me, that I consider that quote unquote fun.
Yeah, and I'll just say, because you mentioned Sean earlier, Sean can be like, if I watch something like this and I didn't enjoy it the first time, I don't have an interest in going back and figuring out what was going on with it. And I think that's totally valid.
Yes.
Me personally, watching this the first time, I love the opening. I think the opening's incredible, and I really enjoyed it up until the point when the camera, or the film, I should say, burned. And I feel like from then on, it started to get kind of strained, and I was struggling to stay engaged, even though I was enjoying kind of the symbolism.
Wait, do you mean when it burned at like the 6 minute mark?
No, when we come back around, like maybe like halfway through the picture.
Oh, okay. Okay, later. Yes. Okay.
Yeah, the camera burns. We get a little surrealist sequence again, and then from then on, it just started to feel protracted to me, and I felt disengaged.
Okay.
But when the end came, I was into it again, and I was like, okay, I feel like I'm getting more of what the director's saying. But I could totally see someone watching this as a first time viewing and being like, it had some cool moments, but I was bored, and maybe it was saying something I didn't get, but I just don't care to go back because I was just not engaged. I think that's totally fair. But me personally, I do get a lot in breaking down, especially the really symbolic moments. Like, I love surrealist imagery, so
And then
I can always find something to dig into with that kind of stuff.
what tripped me out about the that little break you were just talking about, where the film cracks and then burns, at that moment, because it caught me by surprise. Let me tell you.
Me too.
But also, there was a similar image to that during the opening 6 minutes. Oh, well, I haven't said what it is yet, the similar image. But what freaked me out about it was, I had told you offline previously how I was getting all into the latest Bo Burnham special on Netflix. And for those who don't know, that special was all shot and framed and edited all by himself. And there's a lot of interesting camera angles and shots and weird edit cuts and a whole bunch of stuff in that thing. And there's something he does in it that freaks me out in one of his particular songs that he does in his special. And he does this thing where he's singing something that already sounds weirdly moody and uncomfortable. And then he says something like, "Don't be scared. Look in my eyes." And then all of a sudden he looks at you like he's looking in the camera, breaking the fourth wall. He's looking right at you, and he does it in such a way that it's very unsettling. And he does it so well in his special. and that's exactly what happened when the film broke. It cracked, and she did the exact Bo Burnham move, where then all of a sudden she looked at you directly and broke the fourth wall, and that freaked me out. And again, it was all by design, because when the film breaks, it reminds you this is not real, this is fake, this is all manufactured. And especially again, the cherry on top is when she looks right at you. And I was like, oh shit, because you're in the movie, and then all of a sudden you're like, what the fuck is happening? Because you get jostled out of it for a second. It's like getting pulled out of the Matrix for a hot second. You realize you have no eyebrows.
Yeah, and that's a weird point in the movie too, because that's not super long after we discover that orgy scene. The nurse starts breaking down as a character and becoming something that doesn't really make sense anymore. Like, she's becoming super emotional, and she like leaves that glass out there to try to like sabotage, I guess, herself. And
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. So I'm glad. Well, you just said that, because I was gonna say we could do this all day. Like, we could seriously do a podcast and call it Persona, and in each episode we're just gonna break down 2 minutes of the movie, and then that'll be one episode, and then we'll break down like the next 2 minutes. I know people have done this for like Lord of the Rings and stuff, and I think it's fascinating.
oh man, oh,
I know people have done it for Lord of the Rings, like the Star Wars saga. Well, where each episode only covers 1 minute or 5 minute increments of the movie or the saga, and I think that's a fun experiment, to be honest. But anyway, one day, so we could do this on Persona and break down every couple minutes. And I'm not saying we have to right now, but like 2 parts in particular where I was thinking we could just go on for days. One was that I was going to say, what the fuck was up with the glass? Like, what does that mean? Because, like, again, these 2 people are one person. Is this like one half of your ego trying to fuck with the other half of your ego, or what the fuck does that mean? And I'm saying we could talk for days just about that. And another one is, I think it happens after the break in the film, not sure, but there's a part later where I think it's the nurse is going off on a soliloquy. Oh my god, was she speaking to the husband off camera? But it's a part where she plays the whole scene of the soliloquy, and then it repeats the whole thing over again, and it's almost the same, but it's a little bit different. What the fuck did that mean?
Yeah, that's talking about someone telling you, there's this one moment where someone told you, like, oh, you're a great actress and you're really charming, but you don't have like this motherly quality, and then describing how she wants to get pregnant almost just to prove to herself that she can be a mother, but she ends up sabotaging herself because she hates being pregnant. She thinks it's repulsive. She despises her baby, and the baby loves her, but she just wishes that it would die, and she tried to abort it. Yeah, it's a super long scene, and then it just resets. And that especially really made me think of Roby, or Aline Roby-Grillet. He does something very similar where scenes will just repeat, and you have no idea why. Constant repetition. That really feels like something just straight out of French New Wave.
But any thoughts? Because when it started repeating itself, I thought, oh, like she's gonna play it a different way, or like she's gonna say the same words, but it's gonna come across differently because it's gonna be delivered differently. And while it is different, it's still very the same. So what is that? I don't know. Do you have any? I don't know. I haven't worked on this yet. I don't know what that means. Do you know what that means?
Yeah, the scene washed over me. I had no clue what it means. Just spitballing. The first time we see the reaction of kind of the mask character, I would think, which is the actress, and she just takes it. We see her kind of hurt by it, kind of trying to deny it, but then eventually kind of having to accept it. And then we see it from the other point of view, the nurse perspective, and she's just harsh and cruel and completely matter of fact, like it's not hitting her emotionally. And I'm not, maybe I'll quickly fast forward to that scene right now so I can try to see how it ends. But
I hear some seeds of truth in what you're saying. I still don't know how it all coalesces, but everything you've said so far makes sense to me.
Me neither.
Well, another thing, and I'm not trying to overwhelm you with analyzation, but I just mentioned two scenes real quickly. And now there's a third one that I'm still pondering as well, which is, so at one point, the actress writes a note that she wants delivered to the doctor, and when the nurse is going to go deliver the mail or drop it off or whatever, because the note is not sealed or anything, and so she just goes ahead and reads it, and it seems pretty fair and truthful what the actress wrote, but it incenses the nurse. Like she hates what she read, and it pisses her off, and because like who are you to analyze me and this and that, but I was like, but why did she take it so harshly, to the point that she like wanted to hit her and all that stuff? Like why did it incense her so much?
Well, let's not forget, because the whole thing that incensed her was telling her this personal story about how she had this orgy.
Right.
But before she even told the story of the orgy, she says, "Oh, what was the name of that guy she liked? He had like 2 names."
Right. I know what you're talking about, but I can't remember.
Yeah, she says, "Oh, I was always faithful to him," and then immediately switches into telling this story about this orgy. So it's this complete contradiction. So I think it was kind of the rage was facing the fact that here's this image I present, and then I tell you this personal fact, or I admit to myself this personal fact, and then it gets revealed and kind of shoved in my face and proven that I'm a liar. And so she starts going to beat up herself in a way,
right,
through mask version. But again, a lot of this stuff I was quite perplexed by. The really straightforward symbolic stuff with the opening I could kind of wrap my head around. But some of these more extreme, kind of like just regular sequences.
That's funny because that's the kind of stuff that annoys quote unquote normies. Is like, what the fuck is all this bullshit at the beginning? Like, just get to the movie already.
Yeah, symbolic imagery for me, it just clicks easy. But yeah, a lot of this later stuff just does, it leaves me very baffled.
And I never understand how these cosmic coincidences work. There's another term for it. I don't know what it is, but offhand. But it's also struck me a little bit because just like 5 days ago, I was at work, and a coworker was just randomly on the internet, and he was looking up something in the news, and he saw the still image of the monk or whatever lighting himself on fire, like self was it immolation or whatever. But the guy who found the image at work, like he doesn't know anything about it, like the context or the historical, and he just found the image, and he was like, I was like, what are you looking at that for? He's like, oh, I don't know, it just came up, and he was like, this is crazy, right? Like this guy lit himself on fire. I was like, oh, I know. I said, this is actually like a very famous. I said, it's not even just a still image. I was like, there's actually film footage of this. He had no idea, and he didn't know what country this was. He didn't know what the situation was. He just saw the still image, and I just think it was so weird because it's not like I have a conversation about that very often, if at all. And then 5 days later, I'm watching this movie, and then there it is. I don't know how that works. Like those weird cosmic coincidences.
It is funny. I actually wrote in my notes, is this a snuff film during that scene?
Boy.
Kind of a stupid joke, but I never like seeing the image of that self-immolation. It's very disturbing.
Oh, it's terrifying. It's fucking terrifying.
Very, very disturbing.
It is fucking terrifying to pull that shit out of your ass. I mean, to put that in your movie, you're like throwing the gauntlet down when you put something like that.
I also wrote my notes. Is this what Bergman thinks therapy is? Self-immolation? I don't know.
No, perhaps. I mean, metaphorically. Also, other random things that we'll never get to the bottom of today. So she has, like the picture of her son. that she tears up and it's put back together later. But then also there's this part, and I guess I was a little bit checked out, or I was eating my supper rapidly while I was watching the movie, so I wasn't paying full attention at this part, which is where we see these images of like a kid. Where's that kid? It's like a refugee or something. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Oh man, no, I don't.
Do you remember there was a bunch of images that were flashing onto the screen,
Oh,
and the kids all have their arms raised?
it's a picture. Yeah, and there's like troops there, like holding them all hostage or something.
Yes, yes. And I read about it in somewhere. I can't. This is a specific event. It's something. I think it's Warsaw. It's a specific thing. And whatever I was reading was implying that she was thinking about her son and envisioning her son, but the way it appears in the movie is these images from the situation in Warsaw. And so she was like seeing her kid as one of those. What the fuck does that mean? I mean, that's a whole other thing. Like I said, we're not going to crack this whole nut today. It's impossible because we haven't spent enough time with this material to like really break it down.
I remember watching that scene and just being like, I have no clue what this means. Does she feel like she's the kid? I was just completely bullshitting. Like, I had no clue. Like, this person held hostage.
Somehow it represents her kid, but I don't know what the deeper meaning is.
I mean, maybe this whole movie is her in a way being held hostage by herself. Her real self is contained by this kind of facade, this actress, this person who plays other people, but herself is kind of buried.
No, that just sounds like, and I don't mean this again as an insult or to dismiss it, but
I'll take it.
That's a very implied, like almost kind of an obvious type of takeaway. Not that there's anything wrong with that. It's just, one would assume that plays into this of being like held hostage by yourself. Because another like a random thought is kind of coalescing now in real time, but because of some of the images I saw on screen just now. But I was vaguely thinking of while I was watching the movie. I was vaguely thinking of like a Misery type situation, which, by the way, I've only watched that movie once and I don't know much about it. I don't really care that much for most Stephen King things. I'm just saying I'm not an aficionado. He does have some things I like, but I'm not like a huge fan or anything. But Misery, if anyone's familiar with that concept of that story, some of this seemed like a Misery situation, except again, you're both parts. So I picture it like in Misery, like you got injured in this car accident, and you think at first, all right, someone's here to rescue me, but your rescuer is also prolonging your torment, and that's a perfect metaphor for someone getting over either a major physical injury or a major quote unquote mental injury. Because that's what people do to themselves, is they've just faced a trauma, physical or mental or both, and they're trying to save themselves and get over it, but their internal savior is also sabotaging them at the same time and prolonging the hurt. And that's another very obvious but true metaphor.
Yeah, that's fair. There's definitely a big section of this movie where I feel like I was checked out, like maybe the last half an hour. And so I feel like on a second viewing, maybe some of that stuff would work more, but I definitely just started to be like, I don't know what I started to be. It stopped engaging me necessarily at a certain point.
It's my fault. I was pressed for time. I had other shit to do. I was not watching under ideal conditions, and I hate when I do that, especially when it's for something that's so notable. Apparently, it's the worst.
Yeah, actually, because you're saying that, I forgot that I took a break shortly after when the film split. I had to go have my own dinner, so maybe that was why I felt less engaged for the last half an hour or so, because I did go away to go eat dinner first. before I watched it.
For the normies out there, it's like you're trying to show somebody Star Wars for their very first time, and they're like fucking on their phone, and they're cutting their fingernails. And you're like, are you fucking serious, bitch? Like, I'm trying to get you to watch fucking Star Wars for the first time. Like, what the fuck is your problem? And I feel like that's basically what I was doing, unintentionally, but to this movie.
Yeah, there's always something to be said about the theatrical experience. I mean, no distractions. You're just forced
Yes,
to contend with the film.
100%. Dude, we could do a drinking game on this movie, on just because mirrors is a big thing and
Mm.
reflections. We could do a drinking game on just every time there is some type of mirror image or implied mirror image. Fuck, we'll be so drunk, like so quick. Because I've just been noticing some of it as I've been watching in silent. Because there's so many, there's obvious ones, but there's less obvious ones as well, of just duality and mirror imaging. It's, oh my god, this movie's rife with it.
Yeah, and then you saying that kind of reminded me of something I was going to mention. I have it currently paused because I watched that scene where they kind of switch between. We talked about the repetition between the talking about the kid. But I noticed there was a scene where they put their hands on top of each other.
Mm-hmm.
And it reminded me earlier of when they were comparing hands, and then it made me think again of when we were talking about the intro. We see that kid's
Mm-hmm.
hands doing all those things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I wonder what they're trying to say with that. I mean, that's a clear repetition, but I don't quite see what the.
I don't know, but the repetition is even bigger than that, because apparently, just like Tarantino has this thing with feet in his movies, uh, Bergman has a thing with hands.
Oh, and you don't quite know what the reason is behind it or what it could mean.
Off the top of my head, no, but it's a thing though, reoccurring in many of his movies, uh, of focusing on hands and stuff like that.
Yeah, I also think it's curious during that sequence they're wearing the exact same outfit as they're repeating that scene against each other.
Yes, and again, I'd have to go back, and there's times when they're wearing the same color, and there's times when they're deliberately wearing opposite colors, black and white. And
Yeah.
again, if you know anything about any great artist, nothing is accidental. Everything is purposeful. So that's like a whole
Mm-hmm.
other thing to try to dissect on its own.
Oh, I did want to ask. So at the very end, there's a bit that confuses me. I'll go there right now. So we see that they're both preparing to leave. The actress prepares her suitcase. We see the nurse kind of just cleaning things up, doing what a nurse would do, collecting all like the laundry and things. And then suddenly the nurse is the one that takes the suitcase and leaves. So, and it's not even the same suitcase that the actress was packing, which I thought was odd. And then we get a flash of the filmmakers making the film, and then she jumps on a bus and then leaves. And I was like, okay, now I'm sure this means something that I'm just completely missing, but I was curious if you had any thoughts, because I felt like that moment was really kind of one of those kind of keys for the movie. But I could be wrong, but
I just saw that scene right now, before you mentioned it, because in real time it got to the end of the movie. Um, but I know the part where you see the crew, from reading somebody else's critique. That has something to do with yet again reminding you that this is a movie and that this is not real. Um,
and it's even
so
the
almost
Electra scene.
almost like intentionally, like putting the boom mic in frame or something, like, just so you know, this is all manufactured. So the
It's interesting that we see Electra, the statue,
mhm.
even before we see her. So again, yeah, very baffling that section. It really frustrated me when I watched it earlier because I was like, I know I'm missing this, but it's right there and somehow I'm missing it. So it was making me kind of choked. But
Hold on, I'm watching some of it right now and trying to suss something else out of this. I'm watching
sure.
it right now. Because I'm trying to think. I can't put my finger on it. This because okay, hold on. Let me watch this sequence right here.
Oh yeah, and then we cut to the kid touching the frame again.
Mm-hmm.
That's Yeah, because again, I was so disengaged for that last little bit, and then the symbolism of that last sequence really made me just perk up in my seat, and I'm like, oh no, what am I missing? Like, this is so visually poignant, but I'm just not connecting the dots. So it was really bugging me.
I'm still watching and contemplating. I'm trying to think, because just the concept of the leaving of the island, it's done so much in other movies, and for some reason, there's one or two other examples in other movies where that happens that are on the tip of my brain. I just can't extract them. Um, of movies that finish that way, that that finish with we've just dealt with whatever we dealt with, whether drama or melodrama or whatever, and we're done. Like it's resolved, and now the end of this, and leaving the island or leaving the resort or leaving the place that was lent to them, and now we move on. Like it's such a, god damn it, I can't think of what those other movies are on the tip of my brain that end just like that. Um, but I'm trying to come up with something on the spot. Like it like, so there's some implication that the nurse side of the persona is the one that has prevailed. What does that mean? I'm not sure. I have to unpack that. It seems like the mask has been put back as a mask, and the mask seeming to be like the actress persona is just that. It seems like it's put back in its place as not real, that the nurse persona is the more real one. And one of the other interesting images, I didn't figure this out on my own, I saw it in the special features, but like the very first shot we see in the movie and the very last shot is kind of the same thing, which is it's those two elements coming together to produce the light. You know what I'm talking about?
Oh, yep. Yeah, I didn't know what those were, but
Yeah, they're carbon or something. I don't know. I can't remember. But they're the two elements coming together that produce the light for the bulb. And that's very deliberate, again, because this is apparently a movie about making movies. Because, again, this is all fake. And a movie itself, I mean, a physical movie, like on a movie reel, it contains an entire story, an entire whatever, but without the actual light, it's nothing. It doesn't exist. It's in darkness, and so that's the symbolic like element that brings it all to life. And again, it's just a reminder that this is all fake. That it's a construction. It's manufactured. It doesn't actually exist in reality. So there's another that's the symbol at the very start and end of the whole thing.
yeah, and just out of curiosity, because this is something that frustrates me when I watch the Elaine Robbe-Grillet films, is I never understand what the point of that is when he's making his films, except just as like a wink to the audience and kind of a like, don't look at this as a regular structure, look at it as what I'm trying to present. But this movie is much more of a kind of a psychological drama, so I wonder, what do you think the intent is with that, except to maybe signal like this is what the director's thinking? But that seems so vague.
Well, again, I'm too heavily influenced because I've been watching so much GD Bo Berman stuff and analyzation of his stuff. I've been watching so much on YouTube lately that I'm completely polluted by that, because I think it's something that geniuses share, artful geniuses share, regardless of their time or medium. I mean, time is when they're active, right? Like their eras. I mean, because I think all these geniuses, they keep hinting at the same thing. They just do it their own way, and And if you watch multiple Berman specials or his art, his music, he's constantly saying, like, on the one hand, I'm trying to sell this character who I'm presenting on stage. Like, I want you to believe that this is how I really feel, and these are my personal struggles, and I want you to understand that this is real. But then at the same time, he'll make references where, like, but remember, this is all fake. Like, I wrote this in advance. Like, this is not actually who I really am. Separate me from the performer, from the artist. And Bo Berman is constantly doing that. And I feel like, and again, maybe it's because I'm so polluted from watching all that stuff recently, but I think that's what's going on here. That because people probably watch Bergman movies, like I've been saying, and go, "Oh, I get it. This is his demons that he's expressing. This is all about him, and he's just representing it in these made-up characters." And on the one hand, that is true, but then at the other hand, when he does these bits you're talking about, he's also, by breaking the fourth wall and all this other stuff, he's also saying, but this is make believe. And it leaves you as an audience member unsure where the line is, the dividing line between what's actually real and genuine and what it's just fake. It's just fake, because you go, oh, so it's implied that Bergman has an issue with underage hookups, but then it's like, haha, just kidding, this is fake. Like, I'm trying to entertain you, and it's like,
Yeah, I guess
it's like, wait a second.
a level of crisis of identity. That's interesting. That I was wondering what the point of pointing out the artifice was, but I guess if it's just to tell, like, this is me expressing my demons on film, I guess that makes sense.
Makes sense to me.
Yeah, and just because you mentioned the bit about the underage kids bit, yeah, I thought that scene was quite I would describe as alarming, just in the fact that it, like, came very all of a sudden. The character seemed to have a dramatic change from what she was previously. And the story that she told, I thought, was very startling for the time period, with the kids and the very descriptive sexual encounter. I was like, oh, wow, this is very challenging.
Oh, hell yeah. Oh, that's something. That's something to talk about for a second, because for some reason I misread things before I started watching the movie. I think it's because another movie I considered was Through a Glass Darkly, and that movie's from 1961, and I must have jumbled it around because as I was watching this movie, I thought it was 1961 when it was produced, and I kept thinking, my God, this does not seem like something from 1961 for many reasons, including the look of it, and everything. And I was like, God damn, this movie looks modern for 61. But even though it is actually 66, and I realized that not long before we started recording, and I was like, oh shit, I screwed it up. But even though it is 66, there's something about this movie that it looks incredibly modern, or more modern than even 66. Like, this movie, like, if you didn't know, this could have been done in 1976 in black and white. It, like, and of course it helps that they're in an island location for the most part, because you don't see, like, buildings and cars and things that would normally date a movie. And, like, the house they're staying at looks incredible. Did you notice the architecture looks incredibly modern? Like, it does not at all look like typical buildings of the 60s that you would see in an American movie. It really does not look like that at all. It looks like a home that could have been built in the last 10 years structurally. Like, some of the windows and some of the woodwork on the exterior of the building, it looks incredibly modern, not 1960s. Their clothing and whatnot, it's period wise, it's semi-ambiguous. It could be anything from, like it said, the 60s to the late 70s. It's not necessarily tight. And same thing with the hairstyles. And then like the typewriter. Again, you can't tell if that typewriter is from the 60s, the 70s, the early 80s. Like, this movie looks incredibly, incredibly modern. It it's I don't know, it's surreal to me. Oh wow, that sounds so stupid. Like that sentence I just said, but but there's something about that, and that's something that I think happens a lot in European or international film, compared to when you watch American film, because American mainstream film, especially, and even indie in a way, American indie film, people seem to be like, it's like they're using the same playbook. Um, American filmmakers, or like if you think that movies, if you imagine movies were made out of like a Lego set or an erector set, it's like if you're watching an American movie from '65, they're all using the same set, play set, to design their movie. Or if you're watching a movie from the late '70s, that's American. So even though it's different movie makers with different visions, they're still using the same set, play set. So that also dates things. But with this, it doesn't have any of those telltale markers. And I mean, did you know, like the cinematography, and it has something to do also with the Criterion, like, masterfully remastering stuff. But you notice there's like such a weird timeless quality about it.
Oh, it's incredibly crisp, and I think it helps that it has so little music. Music is another big dater for me. I feel like
Yes, and all of Bergman's movies are pretty much low budget affairs, like all of them virtually. Like, they'd be all considered micro budget by American standards, and it's something not just with Bergman, but again with other European, just like the French New Wave stuff. Like, if this movie of this budget was produced by an American crew, even if they're like independent, whatever, in '66, I guarantee you it would have a look akin to like sitcoms of the '60s. Like, do you know what I mean? And I don't mean like it's like on a stage like a sitcom, but I mean there's just this look that would be, this is 1966 if it was produced in Southern California. Like, there would just be a look to it, and this looks nothing like any production would look like in Hollywood in 1966. Absolutely nothing in any way, shape, or form. Yeah, I don't know, like, and that's something I notice a lot in Bergman movies and just certain European films in general. Like, again, those French, that movie Breathless just seems so much more modern than the year that it was released.
it's funny. As you were speaking, I kept thinking of Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, and I looked it up because I was like, that's a movie that feels like it could be this, but the clothes and some of the like vehicles date it. And it was actually put out the same year as '66. That's kind of funny that I kept thinking of that, but yeah, no, definitely I feel like it's a European thing. They just don't date as easily. Maybe they weren't as obnoxious with throwing in kind of pop culture references, which I feel like a lot of American films kind of strive to do for whatever reason. Maybe that's one of the reasons. But again, yeah, this weird isolated quality. I feel like one of the few things that does trigger is just kind of the beauty standards of the time. Like the one who plays the actress who's supposed to be like so pretty. I feel like she feels like a product of the '60s, and something that you wouldn't see too much outside of it.
Wait.
Just in terms of like a great beauty.
Wait, explain again, because I listened to what you just said and I did not track. Explain that again.
The actress, we see her in the nurse character talks about how she's just great beauty. I feel like that level of beauty standard is more of like an element of the '60s. I don't feel like that look is particularly something that's carried on much beyond it in terms of like something that you would see as like a leading lady kind of thing.
So you're saying Liv Ullmann, who's the actress who plays the actress in the movie, you're saying she has a look that feels like it's grounded in the 60s? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and I feel like there was a number of stars in the 60s that just casting directors didn't look for that particular kind of look anymore after it. 50s too had a similar thing. I feel like all the eras basically have their kind of.
No, I agree with that with American Hollywood movies for sure. 100,000,000% I agree with that. But I disagree as it pertains to this particular movie, or Liv Ullmann in general, because I think she has a weirdly timeless attractiveness akin to someone like in modern times, like an Amy Adams type, or what's her name? God, she's in so many movies. The other actress I'm trying to think of, and yet I can't pull one out. Oh geez, I gotta look up. Let's see. She features heavy in Don Juan. Is that what that movie was called?
Don Juan DeMarco?
Not that one. The more recent movie was Scarlett Johansson, and I think it's called Don John. Oh my god, is that what it's called? Don John.
Oh, are you thinking of the guy from The Dark Knight Rises?
Julianne Moore. No, Julianne Moore. Julianne Moore. Julianne Moore and Amy Adams are modern examples to me of these actresses who just have this timeless look. And you can look at like 20 years of either of their careers, and it's just like they don't age, and they just like somehow fit, whether the movie was in 2002 or the movie was 2012 or 2020. Like they just have this weird, like, every girl. I guess in a way Sandra Bullock used to have that too, in a way, but Liv Ullmann, I think she has some kind of beauty I can't describe, and I'm influenced by seeing her in multiple Bergman movies. But the only reason I disagree with being able to peg her down to a casting choice of a particular era is because I've discussed this with Sean offline, which is when I started watching more Swedish movies. Swedish actresses just have this certain kind of Nordic look, female Nordic look, that it's like I've talked about how I didn't realize Israeli actresses were Israeli actresses at first, and then as soon as I figured it out, all of a sudden I started to see them and recognize them in movies. Same thing happened to me with Swedish actresses. After I started watching more Bergman movies, I started watching contemporary modern films, and then I started wondering, wait, is she Swedish? And then I would look it up and go, damn it, I knew it. And so now a lot of the Swedish vixens throughout movie history have like a unique, similar look regardless of decade that I see now. And do you know who my latest example is of she's so Swedish? Like she fits this mold perfectly.
Is it Nomi Rapace?
No.
Is she Swedish?
I don't think she's Swedish. She might. What is she?
Because I thought that the girl with the dragon tattoo. Maybe that's. I thought that was Swedish. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
Oh, I mean, it might be like Norwegian. I know they're neighbors, but still, it's not the same thing. Oh, you're right. She is Swedish, but that's not the look I'm talking or thinking of, because she has an atypical look, in my opinion. No. My example is I don't know her name, but I read Rebecca Ferguson. Do you know who that is?
Oh yes, was she in the recent Godzilla vs. Kong?
Was she? No, I don't think so. Or I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. But she was in a very significant movie that came out in the last couple months.
Oh yes, Dune. That's right.
Yes.
Different actress I was thinking of.
Yes.
I think I was thinking Rebecca Hall.
And so, similar to Gal Gadot years ago, I've told that story to some of you offline, but for Rebecca Ferguson, I would see her in some movies, and I would be like, "There's something about this actress. I don't know what it is about her that's drawing me in, but I don't know what it is." And once I realized she was Swedish, that's what it was. And she has this weird, timeless Swedish quality, attractiveness to me, that Liv Ullmann and some other Swedish actresses I feel like do as well. So it's difficult for me to separate all that. And then, like Woody Allen, Ingmar Bergman is famous for being romantically involved with his muses and stuff. While working with them.
Hmm.
I
didn't know.
Oh yes, so that's the thing. So Liv Ullmann is perhaps one of his most used muses throughout his career, like reused and used, and so often when the characters are talking about in any of his movies, when the characters are talking about their relationship issues, or we have kids, or we don't have kids, or we don't love our children, or we're not fond of children even though we have children, it's all often autobiographically, like it's Bergman talking about his relationship with Ullman all the time.
Oh,
They had a child together. They lived on his island for years together, until they fell out of their relationship, so to speak. But then again, even though they separated eventually, they still remained lifelong friends and all that business. And again, like I said, like even though he was with her for many years, he was also with many other women as well, and she knew about it.
there you go.
And when she was discussing, I can't remember if it was the orgy scene or some other scene in the movie, I was left wondering, is that like a story Liv Ullmann could tell, like truthfully from her own perspective? It made me wonder. I know this sounds like salacious or something, or gratuitous, but it made me think that the real life Bergman and Ullman had been involved in like swinger type situations. But I don't know. But it's heavily implied.
Yeah, I was gonna say, hey, it was the '60s, but I don't know how it was in Sweden, so I can't really comment. Different cultures, I suppose, but
You would think even more. You would think even more liberal and progressive. You would think there at the time versus like the United States or something like that.
yeah, I don't know. I don't know too much about Sweden. Almost don't know anything at all, really. So
I learned about it. Well, a lot of it was from the Bergman stuff, and then of course their history as Vikings and being a Nordic people.
yeah, I guess you probably don't know this, but my last name Holmquist is actually Swedish. I have a big Swedish side of my family that I don't know anything about. So
I'm heavily influenced by Bergman movies, Midsummer, and like Viking related things, and somehow that makes up my base of knowledge. But all that stuff. I mean the commonly known stuff, like they're the people of the North. They were like the invaders of England historically. Obviously, they're the inspiration for the North people in Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones.
yeah, I always used to say when people would talk about Christopher Columbus discovering America, I'd be like, hey, my ancestors, the Vikings, were there long before him, so fuck him. Mainly in jest, but
Oh yeah.
but
Yeah.
but I'm not sure if I have much more to say about this film. I don't know if you want to jump to final thoughts because we're kind of spiraling off on semi-related topics.
I just think this is the kind of thing that I'll obviously have to revisit on my own. Who knows? I've never been one to do or be involved in many retrospective podcasts, like where we go back and talk about something from before again. this is probably the kind of thing that deserves something like that. Um, like I said, it's considered like in Bergman's like top 3 or 4 works, or top 5 maybe, because he has so many notable ones. It's considered like in his upper echelon of best works ever. Um, like this, we haven't done it justice. I need to unpack it more. It's gonna be fun. Um, and yeah, I was kind of not worried, but I wondered what it was gonna be like to hit this movie out of the collection, because just looking at still images, it's like it seems like the most artsy fartsy of all his movies in the set. Um,
Hmm.
of course, the image, I didn't even know it was a boy putting his hand up to a woman's face, or potentially his mother's face. But that's the cover of the whole set. Um, is
Yeah.
that iconic image? And so I didn't know what to expect from this. Like, I almost thought this was going to be like some kind of weird beatnik thing, um, just based off of still images. And it's funny how, like many other Bergman movies you may watch eventually, it simultaneously feels so different from all his other works, and yet at the same time, oh yeah, this is Bergman. It's simultaneously so Bergman and so different at the same time. It's really weird.
Oh, interesting. So, because you've seen more than me, none of the other ones feel anything like this, or are you saying?
They do and they don't simultaneously. It's like a weird quantum issue. Uh,
Oh, cool.
because
Because I kind of wondered if maybe more of his films feel like this as compared to The Virgin Spring. Just being that those are the only two exposure that I've had.
let me think. I would say, if I had to choose, I would say they're more like this, but not really. Because like his
Hmm.
movies from the 50s and prior, or 40s and 50s, that are quote unquote more traditional dramas, um, they feel more straightforward, even though they have dense dialogue to unpack and situations to unpack and yeah, but they're presented more straightforward, like a traditional movie. Um,
Oh,
you know what I
okay.
mean?
So would you say that this one feels more like it's trying to maybe capture the flavor of French New Wave? Like this is him entering, like falling more along with that vein than like his older stuff? Is that what you're
Yes,
saying?
yes, I am saying
Oh,
that, even
okay.
though I didn't realize. But yes, that is what I'm saying. Yes, he's deliberately. He, another way I like to think about Bergman's career, and sometimes Kubrick too. I mean, not their career, but their filmography. It, to me, it's very easy to explain or to compare to like the trajectory of like the Beatles and their music and their albums. Uh, you know what
Hmm.
I'm talking about?
Just like kind of the riding the wave of what's kind of not necessarily popular, but what could be
Like,
popular.
I don't know how familiar you are with the Beatles catalog, but I'm extremely familiar. Um, and so
I liked them when I was a teenager, but yeah.
so their initial music that made it mainstream. I mean, because they had stuff prior, but we're not going to talk about that. But when they broke out as the Beatles, so that started at the very end of '62 in England, and then in '63, and all their songs in '62, '63 were either like covers of existing rock and roll music or stuff that was very sound alike to establish rock and roll music, and they were just really good at it. Um, and then they started in '64, '65 doing the same thing, but making it theirs. Like, this is our version of that kind of music you're kind of familiar with. And then as they get into '66 and towards the end, they feel like they're really starting to push the envelope like a lot more. Like, ooh, something's happening, and then '67, bammo, like they go to another another echelon of existence, and then it's like, holy shit. Um, and and you can also compare their trajectory of music let's just be honest, with the types of drugs they were doing at the time, that definitely plays into the timeline. But I still think it's a very apt comparison to someone like Kubrick, and to some degree Bergman. It's more complicated when you adapt it. But with Kubrick, it makes perfect sense because his very first movies seemed very standard. If you didn't know that it was Kubrick, you might not realize it, like with his very first movies. But then he starts making more interesting, introspective stuff. But they're still quote unquote traditional movies the way you understand them, even though they become more dense and interesting. And then he has a fun time with Doctor Strangelove, and that's okay. He's pushing the envelope now, but it's still we get satire. It's still a regular movie, and then boom, the boom happens, like with 2001, and now you're just like, what the fuck just happened? Like we just had a quantum leap from like the previous movie to this, and then you follow it up with Clockwork Orange. I'm like, what the fuck? Like, whatever seemed like the traditional filmmaker is gone. This is like someone who's on a whole nother fucking level. And
yeah, he's become like an alien
himself. Yes, and that's kind of how you can trace that in Bergman. His very earliest movies, if you didn't say they were Bergman, you wouldn't know. And then he gets more dense, but it's still in the traditional model. And then he just goes boom. But I'm not sure what his boom point is because I haven't seen everything, So I don't know if his boom point is Seventh Seal, maybe. But it's something between Seventh Seal and Persona is where he completely like transcends to the next level. And then like the Beatles, they had their boom, and then they were just all over the place after that. Like they just did whatever they wanted. I mean, they did low key, they did intense. They were just like non-genre specific. They were just everywhere. And then that's kind of like Bergman. After he goes boom as like an artiste, then he just does all kinds of different shit. And that's kind of what Kubrick did too, because he was just all over the place, from Shining to Metal Jacket to Eyes Wide Shut to what's his name, Lyndon Barry. He's just, I can just do whatever I want now.
Lyndon
Barry Lyndon.
Yeah, the IKEA sponsored film, Lyndon Barry.
Yeah.
Oh, but did we do our final thoughts for this one yet? I mean, maybe you gave yours.
You sort of like put it out there, and I sort of started talking about it, and then I kind of like lost my way. This is hard to rate because, I mean, I know I don't have to, but I like to talk about it, about the rating process.
Fair enough.
Which is, I'm tentatively going to give it a 4, even though part of that 4, it's implicit that I still don't fully understand this movie. Like I'm barely at 25% comprehension at this point of really understanding this movie. So I'm just giving it a 4, and the more I revisit it, I know the number is probably just going to go up from there because I know me. It's just, I don't know, because when me and Sean were talking about Seventh Seal, because he started watching, he was like, oh my god, I don't get this, I'm 10-15 minutes in, I don't know what the heck I'm watching, I'm not engaged in any way. And then he forced himself to get through the rest, even though he was so out of it, he did not give it his due diligence, he just had to get through it. He didn't really have anything good to say. He said, I'm sure this makes sense to somebody, but it's over my head, whatever. And so I was like curious. So I started watching it after he told me that, and I watched 15 minutes myself, and I was like, fuck, I don't know where we're going or what this means, or I mean, I know there's a bunch of symbolism, but I too don't really understand the depth of it. And so then I cheated, as I told Sean, I started listening to the commentary on the Criterion disc, and the commentary was amazing. This guy was breaking everything down, and I I said, yeah, so Sean, I cheated. I watched the movie with the commentary on. And so I had this guy explaining everything to me. And so I was just like, oh shit, this is obviously a genius masterwork. I wouldn't have been able to figure it out on my own. I cheated, but still, it is
Damn.
fucking amazing. I mean, man, the way he was breaking it down, I was like, oh my gosh. In Rotten Tomatoes, Persona has a 91% with the critics. It has a 94% rating with the audience. And that's impressive because it says for the audience score, that's a composite of over 25,000 reviews. And to get a 94% from the public like that, that's pretty good, if you ask me.
Hey, to be fair, I'm sure the people who are seeing this are people who are seeking it out to rate it.
True.
So.
And then the little blurb says, arguably Bergman's finest film. Persona explores the human condition with intense curiosity, immense technical skill, and beguiling warmth.
Warmth. Wow. That's a piece I don't grasp. I definitely don't see warmth here. Personally, out of the two films we covered, I much preferred The Virgin Spring. I thought that this film had a lot of really beautiful moments, and some of the surrealism had a really kind of pure, kind of primal quality to it. Like, it really tapped into stuff that I love. But a lot of the drama for me just didn't quite connect. I'm sure on repeat viewings that would come together more, but for me, there was a level of kind of coldness and unengaging kind of distance that ran throughout the movie for me. And I almost thought that was intentional. I thought kind of at the start telling you, hey, don't forget, this is a film. This is a kind of just a vision by a filmmaker. This is not a genuine story. I thought that was an intentional element of distancing, but maybe on repeat viewings I'd see a different kind of shade to it. But yeah, I definitely enjoyed it. It's definitely one that I will go back to, but between this and The Virgin Spring, I definitely prefer The Virgin Spring. So
That makes sense.
that's my opinions on after a first viewing. But
Because I was just reading a little bit on Rotten Tomatoes, it reminded me of something else that I thought was interesting that I read before we had this discussion about this movie and Bergman, which was this writer was saying that like you have to understand what it was like at the time, like when this movie came out. Meaning that this writer said, so like this movie came out, Persona, and the critics, the Swedish film critics, or not just Swedish, but just the film critics, the notable ones of the day, that it was very normal and common for Bergman to get like mixed reviews. Like he would simultaneously have reviews that said, "Oh my God, another masterpiece by Bergman." You know, oh, he's done it. He's topped everything. You know, he would have those types of reviews, and then he would have these other types of reviews at the same time that were like, "Oh great, another pretentious offering." Like, wow, like there's nothing in this movie. The movie lacks substance. There's no driving arc or, you know, like,
oh wow.
and so apparently this was normal for Bergman to get very divisive type of reviews. And as I was reading about it, all I could think about was Nolan Ryan. It's a baseball player from 25 years ago. Christopher Nolan. Wow, I guess I'm getting sleepy. Christopher Nolan and how you'll get a movie like Dunkirk or Interstellar or Tenet that people will simultaneously write, oh, you know, another masterwork by Nolan, and he does it again, and other people go, yeah, Nolan's over his skis. He's gone too far with the detached protagonist who we can't connect with, and it's just crazy. Wes Anderson gets the same kind of shit too. Like the crazy praise and then simultaneous like, oh, ho hum, another hipster production, or you know, whatever.
Well, that's the thing about having a genuine artist rather than a focus group. The genuine artist will appeal to people who enjoy that particular type of art, whereas a focus group is just like, what can we do to appeal to everyone? So it makes sense, and maybe Nolan, maybe it'll be good for Nolan that Tenet was kind of a failure, because maybe he'll more focus on just telling his stories rather than try to appeal to everyone, which I feel like he was somewhat trying to do for quite a period of time, until maybe Tenet,
Well,
when he kind of broke off and was like, okay, I'm going to do my own thing and really focus on doing what I want to do.
it's a whole nother interesting conversation to have.
Yeah, a conversation for another time, and maybe we'll continue that in the speakeasy. But to end this episode here, thank you very much, Eric, for coming on once again, and see you all on the next one.